Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the Capitalist Cast. Today, I am being joined by Lenny McAllister, who is the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools. And we're going to talk quite a bit about education funding as it relates to charter schools and what charter schools have done over the course of the pandemic. But first, Lenny, could you tell us a little bit about the PA Coalition for Public Charter Schools?
Yes, and first, Leo, thanks for having me. I welcome everybody that's going to be watching us both live on Facebook Live and as well as in later broadcast. My name is Lenny McAllister. I work with the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, an organization that's been around for roughly 2 decades. It had another name for its first couple of years, but it's been branded as the PA Coalition of Public Charter Schools for roughly the last 15 to 16 years. And long and short of it is, it's a group of charter schools from Erie to Easton across this very diverse state that have come together, both brick and mortar and cyber charter schools, to find common threads within the charter school community so that they can exemplify and basically highlight the differences that these schools make in the lives of public education students across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Can you just explain briefly what is the difference between a public charter school and a private charter school, or is it just easier to just call it a private school versus a private charter? How does that work?
Well, what you have in the Commonwealth are public charter schools, which are public schools. They're just like the district school right down the road. They're supported by public education dollars that come through the schools, and they're accountable, excuse me, the same exact way that public schools are accountable to taxpayers and to an administration to ensure that education's going through and matriculating a particular way. You may have some private organizations that run public charter schools, but in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, every single charter school must be a public charter school that is a non-profit charter school to ensure that people are not making a profit off the backs of kids while they're not getting the education they deserve. So public schools and charter schools are all public schools. None of them are private schools, Catholic schools, etc.
Okay. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to really touch on is one of the things that Governor Wolf has done is really, I don't want to say demonized, but he's been very hostile to charter schools in general. And then during the last budget address that he gave, he was talking about changing some funding formulas to take money away from charter schools. And how do charter schools actually get funded? How does it actually work?
Well, they get a variety of different revenue streams. They get some from the federal government, just like district schools do, but they also get money from the state government as well. And based on how the formula is right now, it passes through school districts. So you end up having a certain amount of money that's allocated for public education students throughout the Commonwealth based on the 500 school districts, goes to the school district. And then the school district has to determine how many charter school students are no longer in school district schools, and then it's supposed to write a check from the school district to the charter school. Now, unfortunately, what we end up having in Pennsylvania is the district school ends up acting like a middleman for the charter schools. So there are instances where money stays at the school district and doesn't completely follow the child. When the law was created in 1997, the Department of Education basically allotted roughly 7 different exemptions to say, okay, district, you can keep the money that's being allocated to you based on these exemptions and then send it over to the charter school. Well, that exemption list has now grown to over 20. It's around 25 right now. So what you end up having is roughly 25% of all the money allocated from the state to follow a child for public education never gets to them. It stays at the school district. And when you contrast that to the reality that the vast majority of kids in charter schools in Pennsylvania, roughly over 169,000 students, roughly 70% of them are non-white students. They're Black and brown students, and roughly 65% of the student enrollment are eligible for free and reduced lunches. When you take that and contrast it with the reality that these are kids that are not getting all of their state allotted funding, you can see where charter school and charter school students more often than not are already behind the gun. And then when you take it one step further and go back to what you said initially with your question and the tone that the governor's office has taken since January of 2015, you can see that a community that desperately needs to fill the void of education that has been behind for decades with their interactions with the school districts are now behind the gun dealing with a governor that's being more of a wolf towards these, sacrificial lambs than being a friend throughout Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and just to clarify, and just to make sure that I have this right in my head. Let's say that a school district is given $1,000 from the state per student. I know it's a lot more than that,
yes,
but let's just have a nice, round number. So a school district is given $1,000 for a student. That student then elects to go to a charter school. The school district would then get the $1,000 from the state. Yes. And then because the child went to a charter school, the like $750 of that $1,000 would follow them, and that would go to the charter school to pay for the tuition. Is that about right?
On average. Now, of course, you take a school district like the school district of Philadelphia, that's actually over 30%. So now you're talking about roughly $700, and some instances even less follows the kid to the charter school. But on average across the Commonwealth, it's about $750 for every $1,000, or 1/4 of every dollar.
So thinking about it, just kind of looking at the numbers, it sounds like school districts actually, they're benefiting financially by having some of these students go to charter schools, because they're keeping a portion of the money that they would otherwise have had to spend on the student. So, from my perspective, it actually sounds like the school districts are have the ability to decrease their class size and increase the level of funding on a per student basis based on the number of students that are going into a charter school. Does that sound right?
It's ironic that you would say that, Leo. Dr. Amber Northern and I just co-authored a piece that comes by way of a study by Fordham Institute that basically, the title of the study is "Robbers or Victims? Are Charter Schools Actually Robbing School Districts?" And what they found, particularly here in Pennsylvania, is that whenever there's been an increase in charter school enrollment, upwards of a double-digit increase over the course from one school year to the other. And we've had that 4 school years out of the last 11 here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You also see that the increase per student allotment in funding for the school district goes up as much as 7%. So a lot of what you hear from the school districts is that we can't afford charter school tuitions. One, it's not tuition. They're making it seem as though it's a private school, it's a public school. Number two, they're saying they can't afford it. But back to your point, there's a certain allotment of money that's staying at the school district, money for transportation and other type of quote unquote fixed costs that the school district is quote unquote held harmless for. And as a result of that money's staying at the school district. Now, in some instances, yes, you will see that the per student allotment actually does go up. And school districts are basically getting money for kids that are no longer in their school district. And when you take into consideration that the vast majority of people that leave the school district for charter schools are leaving because they were dissatisfied with what the child was getting out of the district school, they're still hanging on to money for doing a job that was less than adequate for that family and for that child, or those set of children from that family. It's a situation where you would think that this benefits both the school district because they're still hanging on to some money, and it benefits the family because they get that school choice. The only guarantee of school choice in America is in public education with charter schools. You're not guaranteed to a tax credit scholarship. You're not guaranteed to be able to get into a private school. But with school choice, with public schools and public charter schools, every American family can at least be able to exercise some school choice. And this would seem to be a way that benefits both sides.
Yeah, and really, at the end of the day, it's empowering for families to be able to look at a school district that they see as being underperforming and have the option to say, this school district, maybe it's just not a good fit, for whatever reason. The parent can look at it and say, this isn't a good fit. This is a better fit over here. And unfortunately, one of the things that we have in Pennsylvania is really it's a monopoly on education. And most people, and most quote unquote liberals would probably agree that monopolies aren't really a good thing. It's bad for consumers. However, when we start to talk about the way education is funded, it's really it's an insistence that there is this monopoly and that only the traditional public schools should be able to benefit from it.
Well, Leo, it's not just a monopoly when it comes to the funding. If you look at how charter schools are authorized throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, charter schools have to go to their competition, i.e. the school districts, and by way of how it's set up currently, ask those school districts to authorize the charters so that those charter schools can operate for 5 years at a time. It's basically McDonald's authorizing Wendy's to open up a Wendy's down the street from the local McDonald's. How do you think that dynamic's going to work out when there's only 1,000 people in the town that like hamburgers? And what you find in education is because of that monopolized aspect of authorization, you find tensions. For example, in the Philadelphia school district, that school board has never authorized a charter school. In Pittsburgh, they haven't done it in years. Even with way the Charter Appeals Board, which is a state entity where if the local authorization doesn't go through, it rolls up to this appellate board for charter schools. That just about a week and a half ago authorized a charter for the first time in quite some time. You have the monopolized aspect that is gumming up the process across the board, not just with funding, but with education overall. And as a result, it does truncate options for families that are looking for school choice the most.
Yeah, and particularly when you talk about Philadelphia, I mean, if public charter schools aren't being authorized, you're really forcing people to start to look at private schools, and then with a private school, as you said, there's really no guarantee of funding. So you end up with lottery systems. You end up with just some really tragic education or a lack of education choices that parents have in order to take care of their kids.
You do, and let's go to the lottery system in just a second, but let's go back to the tax credit scholarships for just a moment. In order to get into those Catholic schools, you're going to still have an entrance exam. You're going to have to be able to be at a certain grade level to show that school that you can do the work, or be able to catch up within a very short period of time because you're on the clock because of that scholarship. If you can't, you run the risk of not being able to go back into that school. Now with charter schools, because it's a public school, once you're in, you have an opportunity to continue to catch up. You get a little bit more runway to catch up. Again, more often than not, people are looking for school choice because the school district school failed them. Now, the problem with that is, even when it comes to the school choice within public education, you still have to win a lottery. The chances of your life getting better are through the luck of a draw, which again, when it comes to self-determination in America, we take pride in our country that we can grab our destiny by the collars and we can hold it and shake it and shape ourselves as we will. Except with education, where we're asking the poor and the destitute and those that need school choice the most to hope that they can either win a scholarship and hope that their kids can do the work, or hope that they win a lottery for the luck of the draw, be able to get another chance at life and another chance at a good academic fit. It's egregious when you really think about what we're saying to those that need opportunity the most. We're telling them that they're second-class citizens and their lives are nothing more than just the roll of a dice. We can't do that to kids and then ask them to be contributors to society moving forward.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's appalling on every level. And unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't limited to Governor Wolf. The recent federal, COVID-19 aid package, for lack of a better term, did that have restrictions as far as money that was able to go to charters, or is that all allocated specifically for traditional public schools, or how's that looking?
The vast majority of the money is going to school districts, and there's going to be some allocations going to charter schools, but it's a tone that's coming from the Biden administration that's unfortunate. For example, Dr. Joe Biden visited the Erie region about 2 weeks ago to celebrate the oldest and longest school that was open during the pandemic. She went to a public school and said, look, this school found a way to stay open the longest out of all the public schools in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I'm here to celebrate that fact. Leo, there was one problem with that. The fact was that our Benjamin Wiley charter school was actually open longer than the public district school that Dr. Joe Biden attended and did this celebratory situation at. And it kind of goes back to the tone as to what we're seeing from the Biden administration, what we're seeing from the Wolf administration and the like. There's this two-tiered approach to public education. Kids in district schools, kids in charter schools. It's the same public education system, but they're being treated differently when it comes to funding, when it comes to second chances. You know, when a district school fails, it's because they don't have enough money. When a charter school fails, it must be shut down. And they're all public education. If we continue to double and triple down on the things that have been broken over the last 75 to 80 years, we're going to get the same yield from public education that our kids can no longer afford. And the poor and the destitute from rural Pennsylvania to our biggest city, Philadelphia, just simply can't afford it any longer as well.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point about charter schools and how they've been operating throughout the pandemic. And that brings us to, really what I wanted to talk about. How have the charter schools, or how have charter schools in general operated and managed during the situation? I know a lot of public schools, still aren't having either any in-person education or very limited in-person education. What have the charter schools in Pennsylvania done, in order to maintain some consistency for their kids?
Well, number one, they leveraged public cyber charter schools a lot better than public school districts did. Because of that us versus them dynamic, the district schools kind of kept an arm's length away from the cyber charter schools that have been teaching online for 2 decades. The brick and mortar public charter schools didn't do that. So as a result, they were able to get their kids online better, faster, but also continue to do instruction, which there's a big difference. Having kids online to review the previous 3 quarters in the spring of 2020 is not the same as getting your kids online and continuing academic instruction through the 4th quarter and into the end of the school year. That's what we found more often than not in charter schools across the board here in Pennsylvania. Then from there, we found that brick and mortar charter schools were more inclined to shift into a hybrid model of education faster and, dare I say, better and more consistently than some of the school districts. Now, you have to understand, Leo, part of the charter school law that gives these charter schools that flexibility is the innovation. They're also not dealing with certain parameters from an administrative and bureaucratic standpoint.
Right.
If teachers say yes in a school district, we can be safe, but the union says no, that school is not going to open up. If teachers in a charter school say yes, and they work with the administration and they work with the parents, that school's opening up. That's the beauty of that innovation. Whereas when you start talking about bureaucracy and the administrative aspect of dealing with the unions and dealing with the school board association and the like, you end up having people more focused on what is best for adults than you do about the whole charter school community or the whole public education community as a whole, which are students and families and educators and administrators.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize that the flexibility that's offered by charter schools is really, it's very different than what it is in traditional public schools. So when we take a look at where charter schools are available, there was a question that came up in the comments about whether or not Indiana County had charter schools. I'm not sure if you know the answer to that off the top of your head, but when you look at where public charter schools are located, is it pretty much across the board in all of Pennsylvania's counties, or what does that look like?
Every county of the 67 counties in the Commonwealth are touched by a public cyber charter school. They have a student in every county throughout the 67 counties in the Commonwealth. Now, quite naturally, when you start talking about brick and mortar charter schools, you have to look at where there's a dearth of good schools from the public education system. You're going to be talking about Allentown. You're going to be talking about Philadelphia. You're going to be talking about Harrisburg, Erie, Pittsburgh. When you look at those metropolitan areas, you'll find the vast majority of brick and mortar charter schools. But that doesn't mean they don't exist out in Altoona. Doesn't mean they don't exist when you're talking about the Erie region. Doesn't mean that you don't have a Montessori school. Like, for example, I'll be visiting Bucks County Montessori School in about a week and a half. These are not necessarily kids that are struggling like they are in Philadelphia County and in Center City, Philadelphia, but there's a difference there in regards to the type of education. You go out to Chester County, you go to Avon Grove Charter School. You're not talking about a 98% African American impoverished, student population. You're talking about a well-to-do community, but parents that still said this charter school provides a different type of education for my kids than the local school district does. One where my kids will have a better shot at life, whether it's for their career or for where they want to go to college or what they want to do with themselves in high school, in grade school, moving all the way through matriculating and then taking that next step in life. You find a wide range of different types of academic opportunities throughout the charter community that school districts just can't provide. The truth is, the school district since 1949, the school district model has doubled and tripled down on the one size fits all. And unfortunately, too often than not, that did not fit African Americans, did not fit Latino Americans, did not fit poor students, and did not fit kids that have IEPs or other forms of special education. If you're coming from a suburban school district and you might be somebody who's from that area, that might fit very well, and it should, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for the kid that doesn't fit into that, should we automatically throw away their academic potential and their opportunity to be contributors in Pennsylvania just because that model hasn't worked for them or their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents? No. And that's why charter schools exist, to be part of that solution.
Yeah, and it's really important to have, that multi-pronged approach, because like you said, kids aren't all learning the same way, and they're not all going to have the same set of skills. I think it may be an Albert Einstein quote or something like that. If you're judging a child's, if you ask a fish to climb a tree or something like that, they're always going to fail. And you can't judge a child, who has different learning needs or different needs educationally. And you can't put them into that one size fits all cookie cutter model and then be surprised that it's not working right.
You're right.
So as we look at the opportunities the charter schools have had throughout the pandemic and just kind of going forward, what do you see as being really being the main challenges or the largest challenges for charter schools to continue to be successful in educating kids? Is it really just going to be a matter of protecting the dollars that they're supposed to be getting for these kids, or how do you see things kind of going forward from here?
It's protecting the uniqueness that the charter community is. It's not allowing for them to be changed from bureaucracy outside or from anti-charter movements from outside to say we're going to improve the charter community by making it look just like the school district, which of course is the whole reason why families left the school districts in the first place. Whether that's changing the funding formula to put more charter schools behind the gun, whether that's to try to say, look, we need to unionize the teachers in charter schools so that they have more accountability. Well, charter schools have accountability, and those teachers selected charter schools to have flexibility so that if you say, look, our kids need a 7:30 to 5:30 school day, we have to lengthen the school day to catch these kids up on reading and math, those teachers are buying into that. They're willing to do that because it's a life mission. Whereas a union might say, nope, wait a minute, our teachers are only working 8 hours a day. They only have a certain amount of hours they're going to work in a work week. And by the way, they have to have a certain amount of days off, and they're going to make a certain amount of money. To start taking different things that have helped cause the school districts to be in the situations that they're in right now and try to take them and shift them over to the charter community will not only cause the charter community to fail, but we will lose another 1 to 3 generations of Pennsylvanians. Now, Leo, you study this stuff. The population of Pennsylvania has been going down over the last 4 decades. Yeah. The amount of businesses in Pennsylvania. I mean, I know that GE left Erie a couple of years ago. The number of Fortune 500 companies have left Pittsburgh over the years. Those numbers are going down. and you start talking about the browning of America, the talent base is going to the Sun Belt. It's going to the DC area. It's leaving the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Why would we hasten that by doing more things that would damage public education? We can bolster school districts, but make sure that school choice, that type of self-determination in education that families have been looking for across the nation, they can have in Pennsylvania without having this us versus them constant toxic dynamic that, let's just be honest, in many instances is driven by the governor, is many
Yeah.
instances driven by the division in the General Assembly. It is driven all the way down to people that cannot defend themselves as well as others can. What we need to do is start having leadership from the top, start coming together, start finding win-win solutions, because those that need us the most need us to get along right now and get along the best way we possibly can.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating when you look at the most vocal critics of the public charter school system are really the same ones who are benefiting the most financially from the current system. In Pennsylvania, that's the PSEA, and then the politicians like Governor Wolf and other Democrats primarily, who are benefiting from financial contributions from the political action committees of teachers unions.
Well, what's interesting about that, Leo, is we've also done polling along in conjunction with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. And what they found is that from an ideological standpoint, the people that are most opposed to public charter schools are far left progressives that believe that public charter schools are private schools that take money from poor Black kids and give them to rich suburbanites in charter schools, which is the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
Charter schools exist so that poor people in the inner city and throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the nation have school choice within public education. And the vast majority of the time, those students are disproportionately African American or Latino American or students of color. So part of what we're trying to do with the coalition and with the National Alliance is show people that their myth is wrong and debunk those myths, so that when it's time to talk turkey about funding, about academics, about good cultural fits, good developmental fits, good academic fits, we can talk about the students and the families first and foremost, not about the dollars and the myths like we continuously have done over the last 20 years in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and that's really at the end of the day what the most important thing is as it relates to school choice and empowering families. It's being able to say, this product, this public school does not meet my child's needs. What are the other options available? And a lot of times, depending on where you're at, there aren't a heck of a lot. But having the ability to have several choices, whether it be a cyber charter school, brick and mortar charter school, private schools, having these various options available, it improves the product, or you would think it would force the public schools to improve the product that they're offering in order to retain customers. But that's not actually what happens. What ends up happening is it just ends up being, well, how do we lock in the money that we're supposed to be getting because these people are choosing to go somewhere else? And that is the opposite of making sure that you're taking care of the kids who are ultimately who we want to be taking care of. We don't want to be funding a building. We want to be funding a child to make sure that they're able to succeed in the future.
Exactly. 1/4 of every dollar doesn't follow schools where the kids are actually attending a school across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when it comes to public education. And these are things that we're trying to explain to people, that there's a long-term benefit for ensuring that every Pennsylvanian is able to find the best academic and developmental fit for their child. If we don't do that, how can you turn around this Commonwealth? Even before the pandemic, we were facing our problems when it came to race and culture and socioeconomics and business employment and development. The pandemic made it worse. Now is the time to not double down on things that have been broken for 80 years, but let's double down on the innovation that we know has worked across the country and can work better here in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and I think that that's a fantastic place to wrap it up. I appreciate the fact that you took some time out of your day. I know you're, very busy going from corner to corner in the state, chatting with people. Again, our guest today was Lenny McAllister he's the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools. What's your web address?
Well, people can find more information about us at www.pacharters.org. That is PA Charters, pluralized, pacharters.org. You can find out a lot about me. You can find out about our team. You can find out how we're trying to expand the presence of charter schools 18-fold over the next 5 years in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and how we are very committed to making sure that public education, districts, and charters alike provide the best academic opportunities and developmental opportunities for every child throughout the Keystone State.
Again, Lenny McAllister, thanks very much, sir. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. Enjoy the rest of your day.